Forgotten Australians, care leavers, have spoken eloquently about what it meant to hear the Prime Minister of this country describe our stories collectively as an ugly chapter in Australia's history that needs to be told and recognised. And they spoke so glowingly of the Leader of the Opposition when he said, "Know this, we believe you." And I'm sure it's simple coincidence that both Mr Rudd and Mr Turnbull are no longer leading their parties. There's no causal relationship between their demise and the apology that they both spoke so eloquently to just a couple of years ago. But beyond that symbolism, the Forgotten Australians have a lot to smile about these days. For the first time in Australian history, the 2010 Commonwealth budget actually mentioned care leavers and allocated a sum of $26.5 million for a national Find and Connect service, which will hopefully help us to find the elusive family records that tell us so much about the reasons we were in care and what our parents were doing at the time. To give explanations, because many of us, I'm particularly an example of that, went through almost the whole of my adult life not knowing why I was in an orphanage. And that's a really strange thing when your children know you and sit around the table and say, why? You feel like a goose because you don't know, because you need access to those files that were kept all those years ago. So that will happen. It's happening now, but it'll happen in more systematic fashion. For the first time, care leavers are being built in as a special needs group to aged care legislation. That's a breakthrough. And that's something to smile about, because many of us, now getting on in years, don't want to spend the last 10 or 15 years of our life in institutions as we did as children. That's the last thing we could imagine that would be a desirable way to end our lives, to be back in institutions. The Commonwealth has funded a National Library oral history project, and some 90 of us have been able to tell our stories, and they will be recorded forever in the National Library, and that will grow over the time to perhaps a couple of hundred stories. And next month the National Museum is opening an exhibition called Inside, which will tell the story of how children got into orphanages, what happened to them while they're in there, and how they escaped. So we put our issues on the national agenda, and we should be proud of that achievement. That's a very significant thing for a community of association like Forgotten Australians to actually have achieved by their own efforts. Of course, there's a lot still to be done. The 2010 Senate inquiry into compensation schemes hasn't yet been able to convince churches, charities and a couple of the other state governments, notably Victoria and New South Wales, to set up redress schemes. That's a big blow, but we haven't thrown in the towel. We've got used to actually now throwing a bit of muscle around the place and talking to governments on an ongoing basis. We'll nag them until they give in. So even with the pain and suffering that tens of thousands of survivors of childhood abuse and neglect, even with that, the voices of care leavers are stronger and more respected than they were even 10 years ago. And this new book is a case in point. Most of the contributors, I think all but one, are care leavers. And that's a significant, I think that's the only book that I know of where a collection has been brought together which is primarily of care leavers themselves. Their contributions are excellent, thoughtful and articulate. I've only had a chance to read a small number of them, but I know they're going to be all very, very good. And we shouldn't be surprised about that. Around Australia, from my perspective, I see care leavers now talking with ministers of the Crown, lobbying their local politicians, giving evidence of formal inquiry, presenting lectures to university classes, sitting on committees, writing articles for the media, signing petitions, joining protests, debating issues, chatting on the internet, and writing and editing books. That's happening, and that's happened in the last 10 years, and it's quite a remarkable thing. So Forgotten Australians are doing their utmost to speak up and to speak out and to become remembered, not just as victims of an ugly past, but as survivors with determination and resilience, and as this book shows, the ability and the will to flourish and thrive. We can do it. Our voices are strong, and Dee and all of our colleagues have shown that we can do it. That's the thing that I think that's really important about this book. Thank you. Thanks, Frank. Very informative.